Okay. So, hi everyone. I'm going to be presenting now a paper that's together with Fabrizio, who is here as well as Daria Stetsenko. Societal AI research has become less interdisciplinary. And I'll start off with kind of the motivation, what brought us to even think about this project, about this paper. I'll discuss the research design, as well as show the results. And I'll finish off with our discussion, as well as kind of where we want to take this larger project going forward. So first, what brought us to this project? I think as everyone here in this webinar knows or feels, like we see a lot of increased discussion, kind of what's the societal impact of AI, of this emerging technology. And more than just as a public discussion, we see this is also something that like AI researchers themselves are worried about, right? And we see this through various surveys that this is, again, this idea of what are the ethical issues and values and impact is something that kind of everyone is aware of and thinking about. Okay, and because of this, we see that the research community itself is trying to implement various mechanisms, right, to try to make sure that the AI research going forward is kind of being developed in a more ethical or societally aligned way. Things like, for example, the ethics statements, right, that if you're now requiring for several, some of the bigger computer science conferences, this idea that every researcher is supposed to be thinking about what's the downstream consequence of whatever research they're doing, again, trying to push the researchers themselves to be thinking more in the societal orientation. But we see kind of mixed results regarding the efficacy of them. So if we take the example of the ethics statements, for example, we see that basically they're much more prone to being kind of maybe shallow, right? This procedural kind of like, just get it done with it, get some two-sentence thing about whatever ethical issues might be at stake. And they're kind of overly positive, right? So if I'm trying to talk of the downstream consequences, it's more, I'll say, my research here will help mitigate whatever issue, and less kind of thinking more, we're not really getting this like in-depth kind of reflection on the societal impact of the research, which is what it's supposed to be doing. So this basically brought us to focus on one mechanism or another mechanism, which is interdisciplinary research, right? The idea of bringing in different voices, different participants into your research team. And this is something that we see is basically being cited across the board, whether it's like national programs on AI and guidelines and ethical statements. Like, again, everyone is kind of pushing for this idea of having more interdisciplinary research teams will lead to more societally aligned, more ethical AI research. And so we decided to focus on that and examine that empirically in this project. And just the reasoning behind interdisciplinary research, again, we see bringing in kind of diverse researchers is associated kind of with more solution-based, real world engagement. So maybe less looking for theoretical advances, but rather trying to actually understand, what's the implication of whatever research project you're doing, as well as disruption of research paradigms. So for example, in this case of societal values, if most of AI research up until now will be kind of based around kind of performance benchmarks, these very technical incentives or benchmarks, the thought at least is that if you bring in people from other disciplines, you start having different incentives or different thoughts looking at this research that could basically lead to new paradigms. Okay, so again, this brings us to our overall research question. Are interdisciplinary teams in fact associated with more societal orientation in their research, which we'll define going down a bit later what societal orientation is as well. So just getting to the design itself, what we did here was we started with a database. We scraped 100,000 archive papers from the major AI subfields for the time period of 2014 until 2024. The reason basically we looked at archive is because like this is a really good perspective or view of what's going on in the technical AI research, right? This is where the community is publishing. And we have everything from preprints, so kind of maybe research that's kind of still in progress or still being developed, all the way to top tier publications, right? So we get kind of a very broad view of what the technical community of AI developers are working on, right? As opposed to, for example, more downstream applications in political science journals or whatnot. And together with these papers, with these full-length 100,000 papers, we also have author-level data, which we took from Semantic Scholar API. So basically, for each paper, we have all their list of authors, and for each one of the authors, their previous publication history. So in what disciplines were all their previous publications. Okay, this is our data that we're going to now explore our research question with. And based on this, we can actually operationalize, or we can develop our independent variable, which in this case is an interdisciplinary category. Okay, again, we want to see interdisciplinary versus societal research. So in this case, based on those author biographies or publication histories that I mentioned beforehand, for each paper we come up, we put it in one of four categories. Okay, the first is computer science only. So that means that the researchers are only computer scientists or engineers. Interdisciplinary, with at least one natural scientist or medicine or medical researcher. Interdisciplinary, that has at least one social scientist or member of the humanities. And fully interdisciplinary. That means that you have a representative from each one of these other disciplinary categories. Okay, so for each paper, we have these four categories that it could be in. And then this brings us to our dependent variable, societal orientation. So here as well, we kind of try to think of a more broader measure, a broader concept when thinking about societal considerations. We have here the integration of ethical values and societal concerns that guide or shape the motivations, designs, and outcomes of research. Okay, so first of all, broad in terms of like the stage or the level of implementation of the research. So it could even be just a motivation, right? One sentence in the beginning of whatever technical classifier explaining that we're doing this on a hate speech data set because this is important, or it could be something much larger, a much more central part of, again, these technical research papers. And additionally, we have both ethical values and societal concerns. So we thought of this as kind of ethical values as like, again, maybe issues of safety, inherent benefits or damages or dangers, risks that could be in the AI models, algorithm, like the technical AI foundation here, or societal concerns, again, the application or the downstream consequences of using this model for whatever societal issue, be it hate speech, again, misinformation, sustainability, whatever. Okay, so again, this is kind of a broader concept that we're trying to measure here. And in this case, we operationalize on two different levels, this societal orientation. So first, we have a sentence level classifier. This is binary for each sentence in our papers, whether it's societally oriented or not. I'll add here just that when we talk about the technical papers, we actually only extracted the abstract, introduction, and conclusion sections. Okay, again, because these are technical papers, we don't want to get too much into the various classifications and the methodological pipelines that are being done, but more on the rationales and the discussion of the design and the motivations of these research. So again, we have for each paper a sentence level classifier, so we get basically the percent of these texts that are societally oriented. And just to give some examples here of the sentences, this is what I said earlier about ethical values versus kind of the societal impact. So in our first sentence, we might have a general research goal is to demonstrate how future systems might bypass their safety features. Again, this is like the inherent safety and ethical issues inherent in this whatever system they're talking about, whatever model they're talking about. And we have another case here, another example of, let's say, several attempts have been made to classify hate speech using machine learning, but these models are not robust enough for practical applications. So again, talking about whatever models or methods are being discussed in this paper and talking about this application on a societal problem, in this case, hate speech. Okay, so this was our sentence level classifier. And we also introduced or developed a second variable as well, which is for each one of these articles using the title and the abstract. We used an LLM to extract the main research question and classify that question as well as being either societal or not societal. Okay, so we have two levels basically for our documents. One is kind of, when I think of the sentence level, again, the percent, so even a peripheral sentence or two discussing societal orientation or societal issues, as well as another variable, which is if the main research question, like if the main focus of this paper is societal or not. Okay, and again, just to go over, so we have our 100,000, our corpus of 100,000 papers with the authors. We have the interdisciplinary categories, the four categories I mentioned earlier, as well as these two levels, basically, or resolution of the societal orientation of a paper. Okay, So let's look at the results. Are there any questions, by the way, up until, or I guess not. I'll keep on going.
No, it's fine. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's go our first question, right? Are interdisciplinary teams associated with societal research? And the answer is yes. Okay, we see here, let me just take this down. Okay. What we see here, basically, I'll first discuss these graphs. So we have two graphs here. On the first, this is based on our dependent variable of the document level of societal orientation, so like the percent of sentences that are societal. And on the bottom one, we have the societal research questions. Again, where the main focus of a paper is societal or not. We have along the x-axis, basically each one of these bins are for interdisciplinary categories. On the left, fully interdisciplinary, interdisciplinary with at least one social scientist, humanities, interdisciplinary with one natural scientist or medical research, and on our right, computer scientists only. Okay, and so what we see here, basically in these graphs, we have the average score for each one of these variables per these categories, right? So for example, if we go to document level societal orientation, we see that computer science is lower than the other interdisciplinary categories, and basically the same as the full interdisciplinary. And especially in societal research questions, so again, papers that are primarily focused on a societal or an ethical issue, we see that the computer scientist only category has much lower scores. Okay, so at a basic level, we answered our question that yes, interdisciplinary teams are more associated with societal research. However, once we kind of look a bit wider at the story and the descriptive statistics here, we see a very different story actually. Okay, so I'm going to take you through our findings. So the first thing we see, we have here a graph where basically this is our timeline from 2014 to 2024. And we have here the distribution of all the papers based on the team types, the interdisciplinary teams we have. Okay, and what we see, first of all, across the board, this yellow, this is the computer science only, is dominating, right? Most of the papers are computer scientists only. And what's interesting is that we see in general that the level of interdisciplinary teams is somewhat stable. Like we see some fluctuations over time, but there's not like a trend of either increasing or decreasing levels of interdisciplinary research. Okay, so again, the team distributions are relatively over time consistent or stable. On the other hand, what we have here in this graph, and I hope you guys can see it actually well, what we want to show here, and this is again for both of our dependent variables, is looking at the percent of societal research based on these categories. Okay, so for example, we have here in both of these a timeline from 2014 to 2024. I'm going to focus now on this bottom graph just to just stay with it. Okay, so we have here basically along the y-axis is the percent of the papers that are found to have societally oriented research questions, the breakdown, the distribution among our teams. So we see that, for example, in 2014, only 40% of all of the these societally focused papers are computer science only, but over time, we see that they actually come to become the majority, right? 60% of them become, and we see this even stronger when we look at the document level, like the sentences, right? The societal sentences, we see that, again, even if like on average, the interdisciplinary teams are more societally oriented, when we actually look at the absolute numbers, we see that basically the computer scientists are dominating. Okay, so basically most of the societal research that's taking place is being done by computer scientists only. And our first question after that was to think like, okay, maybe computer scientists are talking societal, are looking at specific values, but once you bring in someone from like, the humanities, you have different ethical issues or different values that are being targeted. So we actually trained a topic model basically on our corpus. And what we see, and specifically not on our corpus, but rather on the societal sentences, right? So to try to understand what are the main topics that are being discussed when we talk about societal research. And we see the same basic pattern here. Okay, so we're let's take one here. So we have the topic of gender and race. Okay, on our left here, we have a graph showing the mean association of each category, of each interdisciplinary category with this topic of gender and race research. So we see that on average, computer scientists are much lower than, for example, the fully interdisciplinary teams, right? However, when we try to do the breakdown of the actual papers researching this, we see the computer scientists are dominating. Okay, here on this heat map, we have along the x-axis, each one of these bins is one of our interdisciplinary categories. Okay, on the y-axis, the higher we go, the more associated with, excuse me, this is a binning. So basically, the higher we go, this is basically a strata with documents that are that level of associated to the topic. So for example, here, we have 108 documents in this computer science only that are at a high level, at an over 8 association with the topic of gender and race. And again, we see here that when it comes to gender and race, that the overwhelming majority of documents that are actually discussing this topic are all found in computer science only categories. Okay? So basically, what's our takeaway from this is we see that computer scientists, even though, again, on average, interdisciplinary research teams are actually associated with more societal research. When we look at the absolute numbers, we see that computer science teams are basically completely driving this societal orientation on their own, right? And on all topics, even. So this brings us to our discussion. We were trying to think of what could be possible explanations for this. So the first is simply that maybe the internal norms are changing, right? So if we talked in the beginning, I brought up this idea that there's various mechanisms that the community is trying to develop. So maybe those mechanisms are actually working much better than other, research has found. Maybe, people are actually starting to internalize these ethical issues, and that's what we're seeing here. There's also another explanation that this could just be a natural transition from basic to applied science, right? So you have technological foundations being developed, and then the next stage, the next evolutionary stage, will be to try to kind of, see what we can do with these models that based on, just qualitative conversations that we had with computer scientists, this is especially pronounced when it comes to LLMs. So if we look even, I'll just go back a bit, for example, at our, societal orientation over time, the idea is that a lot of this, again, that we've heard, a possible hypothesis, is that when LLMs come out around 2021, it kind of really transforms the discipline of computer science. And a lot of the previous theoretical work and experience that's being done for, years and years is kind of basically thrown out as in a way even obsolete, right? You don't need all this. You have all these researchers that have been working on all this specifically, I mean, actually both for NLP, but also for vision, might have been working on whatever theoretical frameworks they're doing, and all of a sudden find that it's not that important anymore. And, what can we do? Okay, well, let's just, apply it to societal orientation, right? To some sort of societal topic or issue. Okay, these are the explanations that we've thought about with ourselves. And I think the takeaways we take from this, basically these findings so far, first of all, is we see that, again, as of now, societally aligned or societally oriented research is being increasingly done by computer scientists only, right? So what are the implications? What does that mean for this domination, basically, of this area or of these topics, right? And it also kind of made us ask questions. Like, I consider myself a computational social scientist, right? And again, when I first started my PhD, basically the thing I was told by other political scientists was, in computer scientists don't ask the political questions, right? So they're good at whatever they do, developing their models, but they're not even thinking about, the social world out there. So just ask the political questions and you already have a great contribution. And that's no longer the case. So it's not enough for me as a political scientist to just say, I want to apply, whatever topic modeling to elections. We have to start to really think of how we can qualitatively contribute to this development, to this technical development. And I'll just say that this really, I was re-looking over again at the surveys. This is actually your survey, right? And this one of the slides really came out at me, or one of the pages, right, is that when you're actually asking the computer scientists, the AI researchers, right, and you see that on one hand, there's a strong understanding of the societal impact, and this is important. But when it comes to actually, let's say, talking to social scientists and trying to look at social science research, they're not really doing it, right? If we see, how do you find out about what the public thinks about AI? Conversations with members of the public, or even, stories in the media, right? So it's kind of a very narrow way of thinking about social science or social, in general, social phenomena. And this kind of leads us then transitions to where we want to take this next, which is we want to start actually first understand the difference in research. What, again, go dive down to what do social scientists bring, let's say, to computer science research. as well as also start linking with policy and media narratives as well. So to kind of have a more broader view again on this influence, the societal alignment of AI research. And I think, yeah, I'm done now. So just in time, and I'll stop sharing. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Dror. Actually, my alarm went off exactly now, so I think that was pretty much impressive timing. So let's, we have now quite a lot of time for Q&A, at least 35, sorry, no, we have like 20 minutes for that. So there's already 2 questions, one in the chat and in the Q&A. It would be great actually if you can speak to that question. So you'll ask Barbara if you are happy to.
Oh, I see there's 2 here. Okay, okay. Let's see.
If you're happy to unmute and make the question directly.
Sure. So thank you so much, Dror. Very interesting research. And as I was saying in the chat, it was like a validation of something that I was actually observing, where computer scientists were always making comments about the ethical and societal issues of AI, even though they didn't have the training or even the evidence to engage in those discussions. Because another thing as well is like maybe they mention it, but we don't know who they're referencing, how they are actually engaging with the issues. So my question would be whether this could be also, if there's a policy-related explanation for what you found, which is simply the pressure to actually talk about this somehow, acknowledge these issues, engage with them, maybe also for because of funding. I think this is probably something that has happened since 2015, and now with the new political climate environment, may lose some strength. That would be interesting as well, maybe to study in the future if that's actually going to be declining because companies became less they're less under pressure, I think, for engaging with this, and I would expect that a lot of the research being done in AI is being done in the private sector or in collaborations, and a lot of it will be published in archive, will be also coming from those companies. So that's a question for the policy explanation, and maybe I don't know if this is a question, but maybe there's something to think about, whether we could be devaluing social sciences research actually in a way, because it just becomes something that anyone can do. Because I don't know what actually, when you say they have these you call them the societal societal orientation, like narratives of societal orientation. I don't know how far they were actually doing research, conducting research themselves, doing ethnographic analysis, interviews, and so on and so forth, or if they were just mentioning these things. Does it make sense, my question?
I think it makes sense.
Thank you.
I'll look at it from two different. Should we collect questions or just go one at a time, Tommaso?
As you prefer, Dror. Would you like? It was quite a long one, so maybe
I'll start with this, yeah, and we'll see. So
there's not a couple, but yeah, go ahead.
So a few things, I guess, they've asked there, I'll maybe unpack. First, regarding this policy explanation, I think it could definitely be part of it, right? Like, I mean, the basic thing is like we even said some of these mechanisms, like I think policy here might be internal, right? You have an ethics impact statement. It's making people think it. The 2, I guess, questions are still that comes up for us, is that also interdisciplinary is a policy thing we see all the time, right? We see a lot of funding being put in. Everyone's talking about it, right? So again, but we don't see that there's a strong increase in interdisciplinary research over time. And even so, the other thing that still was interesting here, I think, is the fact that it's done the main research question. So it still is not just peripheral. And like, again, I don't know how much this speaks to your question, but there really is a tackling, right? This idea. And I think that this kind of links to your second question or point, which I do think, again, from basic, this isn't maybe empirically back, but there is a bit of a devaluing. I think there is this feeling that it's easy, right? Oh, whatever, you know, I read the news, I know what elections are, you know, I can do it, right? And Fabrizio, I don't know if you want to tell your anecdote, which is also part of it, but all right.
My anecdote, yes, my favorite anecdote is that I don't know the crowd here, so maybe I mean, but you know, I met at an event one of the co-authors of the paper that basically invented the JPEG format. for images. And this person had really strong opinions about the impacts of deepfakes on elections, even though these researchers had never done any kind of studies on the social implications of technology, of deepfakes or images. But of course, they have the authority due to the very high profile of the research. And so there is this tendency. I mean, I was just looking up again this paper on which is called The Superiority of Economists, which I think is quite relevant for the dynamics that we are discussing, in the sense that the field of computer science has some characteristics which makes it very high status. And given that a lot of the questions that are high on the agenda for society, misinformation and so on, have a digital or online angle, although for policymakers, the natural tendency, which is not hard to grasp, right, is to go to the computer scientists. So I think that a mix of these factors makes it quite easy for a computer scientist to not only be willing to tackle societal questions, but also feel comfortable in doing so. So this is, of course, not something that we have really researched in the paper, right? But I think that there is a broader social dynamic that goes into that, and that would be really interesting to explore. Potentially also in connection with economists, as societal hierarchies in science are shifting. Maybe I think the status of economists maybe has been going down a little bit. So I think this is part of the broader story.
Thank you.
Maybe
Thank you
add
both.
in a half a second, just also because another thing I wrote when you were talking is, I think I will say to their defense, we'll call it, when we did start to look at things like my original thought was they're maybe not actually citing literature, maybe they're not defining things, right? So they say we're examining narratives, but they never try to define what a narrative is. This is my original thought, and they are doing that again from very basic checks that we're doing. So they have a shallow understanding or a shallow attempt. It's not like they're completely ignoring it, but they may just cite one paper, instead of now going and discussing a much stronger, or thinking how to operationalize these concepts, right?
Thanks. So let me collect a couple of questions, which might be, because one I think is more clarification, and then a deeper question. So if you can ask Karina if you would like to unmute yourself and pose the question directly. Assuming that attendees can unmute themselves.
As well. I see the chat now, or the Q&A. I can read it, I guess.
Okay, sorry about that. So let me read the question.
Okay.
Maybe it's easier. Actually, or if you want to just read it, Dror. But okay. So Karina and I is in the room. Oh,
hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for your presentation. This research, very interesting. The clarification that I was asking is, how did you define the computer science only category? Is it based on their affiliation to a computer science school or a private organization? I'm just curious of how did you define that?
Okay,
shall we take also
Phil
question? So you get Jack. Sorry, Kian, can you bring Phil in the? Thanks. I think Phil, if you want to unmute.
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
Actually, I had a slightly different question, which is, archive prints are only one outlet, although they're important for computer scientists. But I'm thinking that social scientists and humanities publish in other places, including in interdisciplinary teams. So in a way, I like your study, but this is almost about the study that could be done. The question is, what do you think you miss by only examining archive when you ask this question?
Sure, if you want to pick up those two questions.
Okay, sure. So first, regarding the definition, and I skimmed through it. Again, what we do to decide on the disciplinary affiliation, we looked at publications, right? We originally thought maybe of doing institutional affiliations, but we know that there's a lot of noise. You could have people moving, right? You start in one area and then get a chair in another department or whatnot. So that's why we focused on the publication history and just to see again what have they been doing over time. And we have just a very high threshold, right? That basically any person that's had less than 90% of only computer science is we have a 90% threshold. Okay, so basically for a computer scientist, the second they are for any of these people, right? If you have 90% of your papers are in one area, you get that area label. Okay, whether it's social science, humanities, whatever. And then the second you don't have that, you take your top two. So you automatically become interdisciplinary. Okay, so we kind of have a bias towards interdisciplinary in this case. So when we say CS only, basically these are people that all of the authors on this paper have been basically completely only publishing computer science papers. Okay, I hope that's clear. Now, regarding the question about archive, this again, I think we specifically really wanted to try to look at the development of AI, right? The technical development. So archive, again, when I think of that, the disciplinary journals in political science, you have a lot of maybe discussion of the applications or the downstream consequences of whatever AI development, but this is not the community we really wanted to look at. We wanted to look at, and I think also it's true that even computer scientists would look to archive and are less prone to now start reading, a journal of politics or whatever, right? So again, this is what we were trying to target. So I'm sure it definitely affected the results, but this was exactly what we were trying to focus on.
Thanks, Dror. Manuel, do you wanna just unmute?
Hi, thanks very much for the presentation. I was wondering if you can say anything about how the social orientation of the research question links to the use of some social science methods, something like surveys, interviews, trials or something, or whether this is somehow part of your considerations, whether this is part of these social orientation papers.
Let me perhaps add a couple of questions to that while we wait for more questions in the chat, or if that's okay. The first question which I had is whether you try to look at potentially different indicators of interdisciplinarity. There's lots of, it's a big science around interdisciplinarity. There are a lot of indicators there. Happy to share a few papers. And you have an understanding of interdisciplinarity which is rather high level. But you can perhaps look a little bit more in depth at what the work on the work measuring interdisciplinarity have done, and how you can probably measure better that interdisciplinarity. The second point which I had is that you move from shares to levels, and you sort of compare shares and levels as if these two things were the same thing, but they're not. And you didn't show us what is the amount of publications in terms of how the number of publications change over time for these different scientists. So maybe it might be interesting if you could, instead of using the shares and then levels, if you could use some specialization index. So normalize the amount of paper per discipline with respect to the overall change. So yeah, just using a Balasta index, which would allow you to, I think, give you a more, I think, a better perspective of how these things change, and if there's actually a change within categories or between categories, and compare them. Thanks.
Okay. Okay. So first, Emmanuel, note the use of methods of a specific method wasn't part of our classifier. Like, this is basically it was based on a human annotation, right? We had annotation tasks with our human coders, and then after that we used that to train a classifier. So we didn't include that, at least not directly. It could be that if the rest of the sentence has whatever indicators, it could be considered societally oriented. And regarding Tommaso, the 2 points you make, there's something we need to think about more. I think interdisciplinarity, we started to read a bit, I guess, the literature. I can't say that we read it all. but essentially for at least for this paper, we thought that there still was a strong story to be or finding here, and we decided to stay for that. But it could be that we need to go more in depth. I'd be interested also, even if later, if you even write to me if you have specific things that you know of. I know specific, I guess the metrics, I know that you can do different types of metrics also for how you measure it,
Exactly.
scales and stuff. And regarding also the publications change, I mean, overall, we know that there's we don't know, but I can tell you from our data, we see there's a strong increase, an explosion of papers being published to begin with in arXiv. And it's actually interesting to go down to even an author level, like you're saying, and see even these career trajectories. If it's an LLM thing, like we're saying, we should see certain authors all of a sudden having to be societally oriented where they previously weren't and whatnot. That's an interesting comment.
Actually, my comment is even simpler, because it's I don't think so the two evidence that you show us are really compatible. Again, because one is just pure share and the other one is pure level. And I would use again a Balasta index so that you can see whether the share of papers within that particular categories has changed with respect to how the papers in the other categories have changed. And I think that normalization would allow you to say, you know, a little bit more cautiously whether there's been a change driven by, because again, I suspect that these different categories, the computer scientists and the social scientists or the interdisciplinary scientists, have changed also different rates. So if they also change at different rates, that's what's driving your results. Another way of looking at that might be, I was thinking, I mean, it's very interesting to look at the text of the papers, and of course, I think I go back to what you were saying at the beginning and what Fabrizio was saying at the beginning. This might be just, if you want, window dressing in a way. But how about looking at the citations of these papers? So do papers that talk about AI, they cite those issues that they mentioned? Do they cite papers in health if their main preoccupation is health? Do they cite papers on security if their main preoccupation is security? I think that would also give you a little bit more stable understanding of looking at societal issues than this sort of window dressing, mentioning a few terms in a introduction or conclusion.
I will say that the citation is something we've started implementing actually, to try to, because I think it's a very natural next step, right? Like you said, I think it'll be good. Yeah.
If I may quickly add on that, so first, I think it's important to say that we use two indicators for the focus on societal issues, and one is the number of sentences, but one is really also the classification of the research question, right? And we see that the results are robust to this alternative operationalization. So it's not just someone just pays lip service to these issues in each conclusion. This wouldn't show up in the research question, and so this I think is an indication that it goes beyond that. And then the citation, I think your point, Tommaso, was looking at you know, the degree of interdisciplinarity in the papers that are given paper sites, right? And here, I think of the economists again, because the economists typically they would talk about almost any issue, you know, elections, politics, but a pet peeve of political scientists that they don't cite us. But I would not, you know, does it mean that they're not really studying elections or politics in a serious way? Maybe not, right? It just means that they're not engaging in interdisciplinarity, but it wouldn't mean that they're not really studying politics or elections. So I think it's a very useful suggestion. But I think I need to think a bit more about what that metric would tell us about the engagement with societal issues.
Yeah, it's a good point. I was thinking in terms of contributing to a literature, right? Contributing to a problem. So if you talk about health, do you actually engage with people who talk about that? But as you say, economists are a little bit of a separate beast. So it's I don't know if their computer scientists behave a bit better. I'm an economist, sorry, I can make that disclaimer.
Sorry about
Sorry. Okay, if there's no other question, I thank you so much, Dror and Fabrizio. I think this is really, really interesting and stimulating. Thanks for all the questions. And